So my session here is now looking at marketing and selling probate services. So I'm really passionate about marketing and selling. And we've got quite a lot of notes there. I've actually given you detailed notes. So this is a cut-down version, and I probably should have had the timetable here because my guys know I can talk for England. So we're on 15 minutes, and I'm due to shut up at 25 minutes past when we then go into the Q&A session. So I've given you detailed notes, because this is a cut-down version of an hour-and-a-half session I did as a webinar. So I've kept the notes there so that you can refer back, which means I'll be able to skip through some bits, but if I'm rushing through one area, you've actually got readable notes at the back that you can turn to as well. So before we start looking at this, I just want to give you some few marketing basics. And forgive me if I'm teaching grandma to suck eggs, but there's an old rule in marketing: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if you did something this year and it's working, and you did it last year and it's working, guess what I recommend you do next year? Same thing. And when we look at marketing, I like to think of marketing as trying to crack a lump of granite. So you've got your hammer and you got your chisel and you hit it, bang. And guess what? It looks like nothing's happened. But actually it has. Within the granite, you've got some little fissures just starting to crack, some weaknesses in there. So you hit it again, and again, and again, and again, and eventually it cracks. That's marketing. You have lots of hits, and eventually you'll get it, and something will hit you right, and you'll get a client out of it. The granite cracking is you've got the client. Now, loads of people say, can I just skip the 7 hits before the final one? And you say, yeah, but you just created a new first hit. And so we have this saying about marketing, half the money I spend on advertising, this is Lord Leverhulme, half of the money I spend on advertising is a complete waste of time, and is a fortune for the guy who tells me which half. And that's really illustrating this point, that if you, and we do measure marketing, we do see, well, why did a client come to, which campaign was successful? But you've always got to bear in mind that the reason the client walked through the door and he said, well, I saw your advert in the church magazine. But before that, he spoke to a couple of your clients, he attended a seminar that you did, he's had a recommendation from somebody else. And then finally, at a time when he was thinking about it, that was the final hit when he saw that advert. So just really bear that one in mind. And then when we come to selling, hands up those of you who love selling. God, there's got to be more than a few accountants who love it, but not many. Most of us hate the idea, or most accountants hate the idea. And the reason is we think of them as the second-hand car salesman, the double glazing salesman. That's push selling. That's people who want to sell you something whether you want it or not, or need it or not. But that's not us. What we're about is something called pull selling, which is actually just about asking intelligent questions, exploring the client's needs, and then getting to the stage where the client is asking you for help. You can use tricks, sales tricks, in push selling. If you use sales tricks in pull selling, you annoy people. So pull selling is essential for high-value services, and by the way, probate is a high-value service. So the bad news is most of you aren't natural salespeople, but the good news is you can actually be better at selling than salespeople. Because all you have to do is ask questions. And guess what? We're good at asking questions. So we're good salespeople. And unlike most salespeople who get screened out by the receptionist and the telephonist and everybody else before they get to the decision maker, you've got access to the decision makers. So if you're not very good at selling, maybe it's because you're not asking very good questions. Because I love the saying, if you want a better answer, ask a better question. So part of sales training is actually learning about the questions and when to ask what question. That's not our job for today. So why is probate different from any other service? And if we look at the survey, what was coming out from our people who were responding in the challenges that they were facing is all to do with the marketplace and perception and marketing, finding time to do this work. You see, most of our work in a typical practice, 60 or 70% of the fees is recurring fees that walks through the door every year. You don't have to bat an eyelid. It just happens. Probate isn't like that. So what we have to do is get the message across. And we'll see when we come to look at the competition, we have an issue. If I went to Joe Public and said, where should you go to have your tax returns done, the chances are they're going to say to an accountant. If they're really good, they'll say to a chartered accountant. But they'll just say an accountant. If you say, where do you go to get your probate, they'll say a solicitor. Some will say a bank. They won't say an accountant, because that's not the perception. So what we as a profession have to do is change that perception. And that will take time. Now, James talked about alternates and was saying, actually, you may not want to get somebody close to yourself. Actually, I think, rather than trying to compete with our local accountants, one of the things we should be looking at is joining together with other authorised accountants, licensed accountants in the area, and looking at, is this stuff that we can do together to promote us as a body? Accountants is where you can go. So I don't think at this stage of the game, the other licensed accountants are your competitors. That's not who you're competing against. So who are you competing against? Well, obviously, we've all been talking about the solicitors, and it is where most people go for their wills. And if I was training solicitors, I'd say, well, what you say to the client is, look, you've paid to get a proper will made. Why on earth would you want to leave it to an amateur to actually deal with it when you're dead? Obviously, you need us as the experts to make sure that what we wrote in the will actually happens in practice. And that's the approach that I would be taking if I was advising solicitors. What is the disadvantages of solicitors? They are expensive. They're also slow. They take an inordinate amount of time to do things. Their charge-out rates are much higher, which is why they're more expensive, because they don't have the recurring work that we have. And typically, their professional indemnity insurance is horrendous. You know, £35,000 per principal is not unusual. And I had one firm, that was a high street firm of solicitors, it had a premium of $300,000 on PI, and their renewal came in at $600,000, and they stopped practicing because they couldn't afford the PI. And anecdotally, as Jane suggested, our clients tell us they're not very good at filling in IHT forms. So we've got a good approach there. The banks actually tend to be more expensive than the solicitors. I was talking to Mike earlier. One of our early firms who was authorised, I spoke to them, said, how's it going? And within the first 6 months, they'd got 6 jobs. This is only a small firm. And one of the jobs was a farm. And Dad owned the farm and farmed it with his daughter, and Dad had died. And the farm was worth £1 million. And the bank was going to charge them 4%. Now, they didn't have any other assets. They didn't have any money. All they needed to do was transfer the farm from Dad's name to the daughter's name. And they were going to charge them £40,000. They didn't have £40,000. They'd have to sell a field or something. They just didn't have the cash. The accountant said, well, actually, you don't really need me, but, you know, I appreciate it. And he helped them through the process and ended up charging about £3,000, £4,000. Now, we got one happy client who's wandering around saying, hey, guy, this guy's good, because it happened very, very fast. And it was just an unnecessary expense. But they do have the volume, because everybody has got a bank. So sheer volume will mean they get some of the work. There's do-it-yourself probate on there, and this actually accounts for probably about 50% of the market. But it's not actually our market, because it's a very cheap option. You just download it off the internet, you pay a little amount of money. But when you look at it, it's basically saying this is not appropriate for anybody with a complicated estate, anybody with trust, high net worth individuals, or a business, which is all of the clients that we would be our target clients for probate work. So DIY is not actually that big an issue for us. But then we do have accountants. And if you look at the number of accountants who've become authorised, then that number has been going up. And Vernon was saying we've now got, or Pat was saying, I can't remember who, that we've got 250 applications in now. Now, when we look at the number of people that's likely to go through this process, in our survey, we asked people who have not yet been on the train, are you considering probate? And overall, we had 61% said yes. Another 23 said, well, no, not yet, but we're likely to. And then we had the balance saying, no, we're not thinking about it. When we took the 61% and said, well, where are you? We had about, in round numbers, a third going saying, well, we're going to do it. A third saying, we're not going to do it. And 41% thinking about it. Now, if you know, I appreciate that people who are interested in probate are more likely to fill in a probate survey than people who are not interested. So it is a slightly biased sample. But if you took those numbers and multiplied it up, then we are looking in due course at something like 2,000 to 3,000 firms of accountants being authorised, which is where I think we will probably end up within 5 years. Because actually the number of people going for authorisation has increased in the last few months. And what happens is I had lots of firms, big firms, who were saying to me, I'm not going to do it, we're worried about the solicitors. And then the next thing they find is their big firm next door is doing it. And they think, well, it's not that. If they're doing it, we're going to do it. And I think what will happen is peer pressure will start to say, well, we better be in this, or we could be actually, we're not able to offer the same service. So why would a client use us? Well, the answer to me is, well, why wouldn't they? I mean, we're likely to be cheaper, and they see us every year, they already trust us, and we've got loads of information about them. We understand their business, we understand their finances, we know their family background. It amazes me the amount of detailed knowledge you've got about your clients. You know, the business, the kids, who's around where, the grandkids. You've got whole masses of information. You know about their assets, you know about their income, your tax knowledge is good, and we've got the skill set to do routine processes. And this is a process, probate. It's just a process. It's a system. We're good at systems. Much better than lawyers. We're good at doing repeat work. Follow the checklist. Get on with the work. Now, if they're not an existing client, then we lose some of those advantages. But half of them are still there. And so I think this is going to... I really share the view of that solicitor, contentious solicitor, contentious probate solicitor rather than a contentious solicitor. I share his views. This is our market. I think we'll take it. The only thing standing in our way is accountants aren't very good at marketing and selling. And we've got to get over that hurdle. So how does all of this fit together with our other services that we do? And I think the answer is wonderfully. But if you are a practice where 90% of your work is recurring compliance work, audit if you're still registered, annual accounts, routine tax returns, then this may not be for you because it's not actually fitting in that well with the what I would call the added value services. And a lot of what's driven, certainly the early stages, is the extra services, the add-on services that you provide. I mean, that's not to say it wouldn't be there, but if you're not really into the tax planning aspects of it, you're not really advising on IHT and things like that, then I think you haven't quite got the advantages of some of the other firms. And we did see a third of the firms who said, well, we thought about it, said, well, we're not doing it. We've decided not to do it. And actually, some of those is not because of fear or anything. What they're actually saying is, well, you know what? The real money is in the estate management side, the estate administration. I'm going to do everything up to PA1. I'm then going to pass that across to a local firm of solicitors. I'm going to screw them down on fees so that they're doing it on a fixed fee for me. And then I'm going to pick up the rest of the work. And that's a viable option. Just make sure that everybody in the firm knows where the line is and you don't cross it. But that's an option. So you don't have to go down the authorisation route to benefit from some of the work, but just be careful, there is a line. And I was told off, it's not illegal, it's criminal, which is worse. So just do watch that line. Lots of firms that we've been dealing with, and SWAT UK in a typical year will deal with about 3,000 firms of accountants. So, we see a lot of what's going on out there. And lots of them now have already been executors. And Jane mentioned the guidance that ICAEW have produced, and that does talk about what you're allowed to do as an executor if you are not in a licensed firm. And there are limits. You say, well, I'm an executor, it's my job to do PA1. Well, not if you're going to charge for it. And I don't like this idea of, well, I won't charge for that 2 hours. I think that is highly, highly dangerous. So in that situation, you pass the work to somebody else, to the other executor to do, or you pass it on to a solicitor. But it does give us this cradle to grave. And there are people who say, well, look, watch out when you're actually naming individuals, because, of course, the person that is being named may well actually predecease the client. So we have firms who are looking at sort of trust companies that they're using to do that, or a particular name or another partner. But make sure you've got that will drafted properly. If you're into IHT planning and estate planning, this is a no-brainer. You're already calculating the liability of that. You're looking at legitimate strategies for minimizing IHT. And from that point of view, you're looking and saying, well, how are we going to solve that? Maybe the client's turned their shares into cash. So they've lost business property relief. So you're talking to them about, well, what are we going to put in place? Are you going to reinvest in BPR investments? Are you going to put life insurance in place? What are you going to be doing? As part of that strategy, you'll be saying, well, how's your will? And any time you'll see a recurring point coming through this, any time you're talking to a client about these sort of things, and you're talking about death, then you can start to say, well, if we're putting an IHT strategy in place, wouldn't it make sense if the person who's actually following it through, when it becomes the key point, but when you've died, actually understood what it was these strategies were trying to achieve? So we can use the same argument that the lawyers would use. Well, I wrote the will. Wouldn't it make sense if I actually saw the will through? Well, you did the IHT strategy planning. Doesn't it make sense for you to see it through? Mike talked about elder care services, and we've got a number of firms who are doing elder care. And this term was sort of first coined in about 1998 in the States, and became sort of quite a vogue for a while. But it's just actually targeting part of your client base and saying, well, okay, there are specific issues and needs that you've got. At this stage, we don't perhaps want to be into speculative investments, so we need to sort that. We need to make sure that whilst we're protecting your IHT, we might be shunting things on return to settler trusts and this sort of thing. But by the way, you need to have enough money to live on. So they're doing cash flow forecasts and saying, well, will you be able to afford to live? At what point are you drawing your pension? What's your care requirements going to be? How are they going to be funded? Are you getting all the benefits that you need? So there's a whole range of services around this. And of course, all of the time it's saying, well, what does your will say? And part and parcel of that, we're looking at trusts, we're looking at your will, we're looking at enduring or lasting powers of attorney. Let's actually look at who deals with this when you do die. So there's you're doing stuff which just naturally fits in this conversation. And you're seeing these clients. So we're seeing them time and again. Solicitors only see them if it's a problem. We really have got an advantage to take this. If you've got wealth management, financial planning within your organisation, then this is a no-brainer, because this is the best fit. Because all the time, this is what they're looking at. They're looking at IHT, they're looking at your wills, they're looking at life insurance, critical illness, all this stuff. Probate is the obvious next step, as it says up on the slides there. And of course, what we've already got, because we've done the fact find, we already know about the assets. We already know about the family. If you compare that with the solicitor, they're starting with nothing. They don't know what the business is. They don't understand the business. They don't know what your needs are of the family. They've not worked with the family for years, so they don't really understand where they're coming from. We've got all this stuff on file. We're halfway there. Well, that might be an exaggeration, but we've got a good start. I used to work with firms a lot on succession planning and exit planning, and the first thing you say, even to a young partner coming in, said, what's the end game? What do you want out of this job? What do you want out of this business? How are you going to exit from this? And trying to explain to a 30-year-old that you need to think about this, because that's actually important in the way you structure it, in the way you operate. You know, what are you going for? A trade sale, internal sale, pass it to family? What are you doing? If it's not a family business, then how are we going to protect the shareholders who are remaining if your main shareholder dies? Have we got shareholder protection in place? What does your shareholder agreement say? You know, do you really want his shares, the majority shareholders, suddenly going to the wife who doesn't know anything about the business? Or have you got rules? So you're having these conversations, and of course, as we say, any conversation about this leads on to, well, what happens when you die? What does your will say? Should we be helping you with this? Business protection advice. Well, we kind of covered it in some cases, but we're also looking at key directives. So all of this stuff you can see leads to these conversations as we move on. Business valuations. Well, if it's for an exit or something like that, or on valuing on death, well, we've kind of covered that. But of course, then you've got business valuations because of divorce. Well, any major change, divorce, they've had grandkids, well, you need to look at your will. So you start to have a conversation about the will. And guess where that leads? And trust works. You've got trust clients. Look at those. Look at the trust clients. Is there anything you can do there? Does that give you an opportunity for discussion with whoever's there? So there's a lot of stuff that we do that really fits in very naturally with what we're doing. Now, the one that I actually missed from that list is insolvency. Because if you look at estate administration, what sort of skills do you need? Taking assets and turn them into cash. So we've actually come across and spoken to a number of insolvency practitioners who see this as quite a natural link to the stuff and the skills that they've already got. So how do we deal with this in terms of the approach for marketing? I jokingly put this slide together when I first started. You know, what does a client look like? Is he still breathing? And then I rang this firm that I mentioned with the farm for £40,000 fee quoted from the bank, and they'd got 6 clients. And most of those weren't breathing at the time they won them. You know, they weren't sort of clients that had been set up and were there. It was, they wrote literally, in terms of their marketing, I said, what have you done? So we wrote to every client. I said, is that it? I said, that's it. And they got 6 jobs in the first 6 months. And in 4 of those jobs, they weren't appointed as executors. We had 2 with solicitors and 2 with banks in place. And the family persuaded them to change. They weren't always graceful about it, but they did. And the accountants took over the work. So is he currently breathing? Well, it may be too late, but it may not be. Then we're looking at, does the client actually need probate? Obviously, if it's a small estate, then there's nothing to be done. That's fine. Is it a simple estate? Well, actually, a little bit like the farm, with dad owning the farm, passing it to the daughter, it's not that difficult. They might be able to do it themselves, or you can guide them through, and they can do most of the work. It really depends. Mike said, look, they're grieving at this time. And so you've got a real balance here. You've got to be helpful, but you've also got to consider what's best for them. Do they need the expense of you doing it all? You know, if, like the farm, money was tight, land was great, value's going up, but they didn't have any cash, then how can we help them to minimize the fees? And what we're looking for is our target client are those that fall out the bottom. And that's those with complicated estates, high net worth individuals, and so on. So go back over the services I listed, IHT, financial planning, etc., and say, well, have we got a client? So go through your client portfolio. Which clients get some of those services? Now, I still say write to every client, telling them that you're able to do this, because they will actually store that knowledge. And you may find that that file, that letter gets put in the file with the will and everything else and comes out 10 years later, for all you know. So certainly do what I would call scattergun marketing, just tell everybody, but then target more marketing at these high net worth individuals, family business owners, elderly clients, plus clients who use those other services. And it doesn't matter if somebody ticks a box 5 times. I'd rather have them on a list of 5 times than not at all. And of course you dedupe it and you get rid of the duplicates. But that gives you a target list. These are the people where we think actually there's a reasonable chart. If we get the job, it's a fairly chunky job. And we're looking more at the 15 to 25,000, if we're picking Mike's figures, than the sort of 3,000 to 5,000 end, which will be the simple jobs. Now, one of the other things I would really recommend is strategic alliances. Go talk to other people. Now, if you're going to do if you're going to recommend other people or work with other people, you need to make sure that actually they are of an appropriate quality, that it's not going to come back on you if you recommend them and it goes wrong. You've actually done your due diligence. So talk to your existing clients. Ask for references. We used to have, we don't do it anymore, but we used to have strategic partners, and people were coming to us saying, oh, well, can we work with you, SWAT UK? And we sort of used to say, well, okay, we'll have a look at it. And so we'd say, we want to see some clients, and we want to talk to some clients, and we would actually ring them up. And I can remember one conversation, we spoke to this person, he said, they gave my name, I'm suing them, they're useless. So it really does pay. Have a look at their website. What happens when you speak to them, when your staff speak to them? What feel do you get from these people? Now, if you have that, always track referrals, both ways. If it turns out that you're sending work to them and you're not getting any back, then what's in it for you? You're almost better just not bothering. Now, I wouldn't recommend that you go to somebody who's useless who sends you lots of work, so the due diligence is still important. But who are we talking about? Well, the first on the list is solicitors. And actually, we've had the comment that some solicitors are already recognising that now we've got staff that are trained, maybe we can help them. But what I had in mind was the firms that don't have a probate department. So if you've got a reasonable firm in town and they don't have a probate department, where do you think they'd prefer to send probate work with their clients? To the other firm of solicitors down the road or to you? And of course, we do have to pass over contentious probate issues, and they'll hand it back. But occasionally, they will get work directly. And when we spoke to the contentious probate solicitors, they say, well, we just farm it out amongst those who give us work. So there is some scope there. Will writing tends to be not a very expensive job, but it's high risk. And I've talked to several solicitors who rub their hands in glee at the thought that accountants are going to be writing wills, because they say, great, we'll make loads of money when it comes to court. So most of the time, I would suspect that most people will want to just send this work out. And that's likely to be one-way traffic. However, that doesn't mean you just say, oh, client, go and see a solicitor. What it means is you can sit down with the client and say, well, what do you need? What do you want? What happens? And quite often when I was working with firms of accountants, I would look at shareholder agreements or partnership agreements, and I'm not a lawyer, and I wouldn't draft it. Well, I have drafted some, but it's always been with the caveat, well, it's up to you, but I'm not taking any responsibility for this. And what I drafted was what I would call a heads of agreement. These are the key points. And I say, now take it to the solicitor. If you don't want to, that's your problem. But what we're looking at here is we sit down, we know the client, and we come up with a heads of agreement, an outline of what the will's going to say. And by the way, what does it include there against executors? Us, as the executors. And then you pass it to the will writer, the solicitor, and say, can you put that into a legal document, please? Can you quote me a fee in advance? Talk to the IFA. If you don't have an in-house department, talk to an IFA. Now, you must... Well, you mustn't, but many firms are still referring clients to an IFA somewhere. It may be on commission basis, it may not be. But talk to the IFA about what you're doing. because as I said, that's the service that fits in most closely with probate. Now, most IFAs won't deal with the wills. So at the moment, all they're saying is go off to a solicitor, and guess what happens? The solicitor writes the will, puts themselves in as executor. So you want to try and pick up on that work. Now, until we get to the point where we're allowed to do this, then at the moment, we can't actually do the oath. We can't deal with that side of it. So that is likely, we're going to need to go and get that Commissioner of Oaths. That's likely to be one-way traffic. And you will need other people to help you out. So you will be looking for, well, okay, what do I do? How do I value this land? How do I value the share portfolio? How do I sell the property? So there will be other people that you will need to have in place for when this work comes out. So it's probably worth thinking about that in advance and going and talking to people. Again, it's likely to be one-way traffic, but you never know. You never know. So let's look at what we actually do. So far I've talked about why we market, who we do work with, but I've not actually talked about the marketing activities themselves. And so in our survey, we listed a whole pile of marketing activities and said, what are you doing? And when we first looked at this, we actually found that not that many people were doing that much. There was a bit of we'd write to our clients. Some of them put it on their website. We actually looked at the initial websites. So we looked at a dozen in the early days. So I haven't gone back and started looking at people's websites recently. But of the first 12 I looked at, 2 of them emphasised probate. One had it right on the front page with a big first for probate. Details are in your note. Another was first to be, or pleased to be the first licensed or authorised in Wales. And they were really emphasising, hey, we're there first. We did have one firm who put on their website, we've recently passed our exams. And I'm going, oh no. Oh gosh, I've recently become a doctor. Would you like me to do your open heart surgery for you? Or would you like me to try it on a few other people first? There are ways that you say things. And the message that we're getting across is, look, we've been doing a lot of this work for years. We've just not been allowed to do this little bit of it, the reserved legal part of it. Now we can do that as well. And one of the things I'm going to really push is being the first, or one of the first. There are only 196 firms at the moment. The chances are, if you're licensed early, and that means before we get up to over 500 or so, you're going to be the first in your town or one of the first in your town. So I think we really need to start looking at that. When we look at the website, we don't just want something on the website as saying, well, we can do this work. Remember what I said at the beginning. We've got to overcome the concept that this is, people don't think of us for probate. So you have got to actually portray yourself as probate specialists, people who know what they're talking about. So you want lots of articles on your website. You want to have articles about the fact that you've been authorised. And then you're following up things like the importance of, well, you can see I've listed some ideas for articles there. But you need these on your website. And what we're looking at is doing, say, one a month, so that when we link into your newswire, which I'll cover in a minute, each month you're talking about a new article. Have a look at YouTube. Have a look at putting videos up on it. It's not difficult. It's not difficult at all to do a little video and stick it on YouTube. And if you do a search when we get to social media, you'll see there's not a lot on there, which means it's an opportunity for us to start taking that marketplace in social media. So I searched social media, and I went and had a look and came up with some interesting articles on making a living will, 10 reasons not to use a do-it-yourself will kit, And this was going back a bit when Robin Williams died, but there was quite a bit about probate and Robin Williams because he didn't have a will. No, he did, or his family were arguing over it. So they were into a dispute over that. I looked for UK Facebook sites because most of this stuff was in America. And we got on about ISA allowances, care costs were in there. I love this one, don't let people argue after you've gone. A client testimony. You know, those of you who've done it, get some client testimonies, put it up on your website, tweet it, send it out on Facebook. Twitter, #probate, came up with Lord Lucan. Remember, he was officially declared dead a few months ago. There was a bit on about this point that was being raised about the potential for probate fees to go up to £20,000. And Prince died recently. He didn't have a will either. Now, I am not a legal expert, and I've been told this, and I've never bothered to check it's true. So I'm going to give it you with a caveat that this may not be right, but I was told that if you die intestate and you've got kids, they automatically go into care. It doesn't go to mum or dad, and they've got to fight to get it back. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but I can believe it is, because one of the jobs of the will is to say what happens to the kids. But if it's not, I apologise. But we need to be encouraging our clients to have wills anyway. There really isn't much on probate out on social media. Now, some of you say, well, it doesn't work then, so it's not worth bothering. But I'm not a pessimist like that. I'd say, what an opportunity for us to take that market and start tweeting about it, putting it out on social media. And I think Facebook is the right one. Normally I say, well, Facebook's for private stuff, and LinkedIn is the one you use for business. But actually, I think with probate, I would go for Facebook. Social media is virtual networking. If you went to a networking event and there was this guy who cornered you and constantly tried to sell you, you would avoid him like the plague. And the same is true with social networking. Don't just constantly sell, sell, sell. You've got to come up with things that are interesting and people might want to read. Post general articles as well. Post whenever you add a newswire, an article to your website. I sent out stuff, well, I've just put the finishing touches to this lesson, to this workshop. When I was coming up on the train yesterday, I said, well, okay, heading up to the sellout workshop. SWAT UK have been posting today with looking forward to the workshop. And it's instant stuff, so you're allowed to repeat yourself. You can actually send it out 2 hours later again. You don't have to say, well, I did that. Because, by the way, if you're into Twitter, you never go back and see what did the guy tweet yesterday. You just look at it now. So during the event, like today, post stuff. If you actually look at me, at Michael Sturgess, you'll see I was at Synod for the church, the diocese in Truro. And during the Synod event, when I wasn't actually presenting the accounts, I was actually retweeting and tweeting. So was the bishop, actually. He wasn't listening either. And then say thank yous after the event. So grab people's attention and humour's okay. And you can put pictures on this stuff as well. I loved the one about argue about my will over my dead body. I really loved that one. It's the sort of stuff that you can put up there. And one of my clients came up with, well, 2 certainties in life, death and taxes. Now we can do both. And I don't mind. Another thing about marketing, if somebody comes up with a good line, steal it. It's perfectly okay. Just if somebody's doing something, think, well, that's good. Obviously, there's plagiarism, breach of copyright that we need to be careful of, but you can't really copyright an idea. Use the concept. Email marketing. Send the stuff out. If you're into a newswire every month, make sure that actually you are talking about probate every month. Every month there's something there. Hopefully, it's a different article that you're putting up on the website. But if not, just tell them about probate. Just keep saying, we can do this stuff. You may find this really amazing and unbelievable, but do you know something? Your clients don't read everything you send them. So it doesn't hurt to tell them more than once. Then eventually they might spot it. And a physical newsletter is still actually quite useful these days because people are so used to being bombarded with emails that half the time they just go through delete, delete, delete. So a piece of paper could be quite useful. And we're seeing some firms actually returning to physical newsletters. And of course, if you're doing that, you can start to talk about probate, refer them to your website, talk about seminars that you're doing. Have some leaflets. Make sure you've actually got some marketing leaflets and literature that you can talk about and give to people. Leave behind. Well, if you're sending a letter out, you need something to go with the letter. So send them the leaflet explaining what you do. If you write marketing materials of any form, short words, short sentences, short paragraphs. They are not interested in subparagraph 15 of clause 75 of this act. Just don't get there. Think of a letter that you get. If it doesn't just go straight into the bin, because you take the magazine and shake it over the bin to get all the stuff out, if you get a marketing letter, how long has it got? About a second? 2 seconds? If the heading doesn't grab your attention, it's in the bin. If the heading grabs your attention, you read the first line. If you're bored by the end of the first line, it's in the bin. You've got to grab people there, and it's got to look visually appealing. Don't cram all the text in so you can fit it on one side of a paper. And use magic words. New, guaranteed, announcing, save, sex. Difficult to get that one in within the Institute rules, but that is one of the best magic words, but it's very difficult for probate. But use those positive words. Press releases. How many of you know who Bishop Libby Lane was? A few nods. She hit national TV. She was the first women bishop of the Church of England. She wasn't even a diocesan bishop. She's a suffragan bishop. That means it's like a salaried partner instead of an equity partner, okay? So she's not running a diocese. She's there as a number 2. And Gloucester got the first diocesan woman bishop, but that wasn't anywhere near Bishop Rachel, wasn't anywhere near as big a show as Libby Lane. So this comes back to, you are the first, but you're not saying, oh, I can do this work. This is a huge change in law. For the first time, accountants can do reserved legal services. For the first time, women were promoted to bishops in the Church of England. I don't think you'll hit the national press and the 6 o'clock news #1 item. But what we're saying is not, oh, we can do this work now. We're saying, hey, did you know this change has happened? And it's come to our town. That's what you're talking about. That'll get in the papers. They're not in the least bit interested in the smug article saying, we can do this work now. Come to us. That'll just get in the bin. So you've got to sell the rules changing. And make it interesting. Include pictures. Make it human. Actually, give it to your family members to read. Give it to the secretaries to read. If they're not interested in it, nobody else is going to be. Client seminars are brilliant. They are one of the best things that you can do, but don't underestimate it. You want a minimum of 10 hours preparation to 1 hour presentation. If you don't give the speaker that, chances are it's going to come across as a bit amateurish. And please don't pick the person who's technically the most able. Put them on a panel at the end, but don't put them up in front of people if they can't speak. Technical knowledge and professional speaking is very, very different. Make your title interesting. If your title's boring, it may be the best session going, but nobody's going to turn up. So make sure that you can pick that up. This is a networking event. Get your team there. You need as many people there as possible who know what they're talking about. Normally, I would say, and I asked for today, could we use the room out there for the teas and coffees? Because one of the things that you noticed today is you grabbed your tea and coffee, you took a seat. It's very difficult to come into the middle of a row and have a chat with you. So you want your people in room 1 having teas and coffees while you're chatting to them. Then you take them into the event and you have a session, then you have a tea break. And then you take them back and you have another session, and then you have nibbles and drinks afterwards. And those not in the session are the most important parts. It's a networking event. You follow up everybody. Glad you made it. These were the key points we raised. Sorry you didn't turn up. You'd booked, but you didn't turn up. These are the key points we raised. And all the time, can we come and talk to you? Can we help you? Sorry you couldn't come for those who you invited and didn't turn up. These are the key points. If there's any interest, do let us know. So it really is following up. Look at local adverts. Parish magazines, things like that. Church of England, now that I'm retired, you might have got, I'm quite heavily involved in Church of England. I'm chairman of Dyson Board of Finance in Truro. So I see lots of statistics. And 30 years ago, the number of people going to Church of England was exactly the same, whatever the age range. Now, you are 8 times more likely to go to Church of England if you're 80 than you're 18. What sort of people do you think might need probate soon? If you went to my church and went on our website, you'd have a page on our website, 20,000 hits in the summer, 10 in the rest of the year, 50 quid for the year. It's a no-brainer. You know, have a look at some local adverts because you know, they'll sit, the parish magazine will sit in the doctors, it'll sit in the dentists, things like that. Direct mail. You know, link it to your seminars, link it to other bits and pieces, and make sure you follow it up properly. I'm going to skip over that. And there are other marketing activities that you can do. And again, I'm going to skip through these. I've got details in your notes. You don't have to start from scratch. If you've got our marketing, if you've got our probate manual, there's a section in there on marketing, and we've put lots of bits and pieces in. So Mark was talking about actually putting together a glossary of terms and a guide to probate for the family. Well, we got one. Got one in the manual. Now, it's a Word document, so you can do what you like with it. But it's always easier to start with something than a blank piece of paper. And there's other promotional stuff that you can do. So if we're looking at this, a couple of other ideas. With some of my firms that I was dealing with, we looked at how we can get more IHT work. And so we produced a document, a questionnaire, that went out and said, what have you got? Because you think, well, we'd know about the assets, but you wouldn't know about the holiday home in Cornwall if they don't let it out. Not necessarily. So he said, well, what do you own? Is it in, let's be husband, wife, but you may want to use other terms. But husband, wife, or jointly owned, or is it in trust? What have you got? And we used to use that and get these back and say, oh, yeah, nothing much there. Nothing. Oh, that's good. The trouble is some of the firms sent them out in bulk just before tax season, and they sat in the corner in a file, in a box, and nobody looked at them for 6 months. Disaster. That's a PI claim waiting to happen because you wrote out saying, in order to help advise you and provide you with good advice, can you do this? And they did it, and then you ignored it. But it's a good way of actually then looking at that and gathering information. You can then go back and start a conversation with the client. And I've already mentioned this idea of will writing. Actually create a template where you can go through each asset, what's going to happen to each asset, who's going to get it, what happens if they predecease, is it going in trust, are there any other trusts, who's going to be executor, and so on. So you create this template that then goes off to the solicitor. So loads of ideas there. In terms of just summing up before we get on to the question mark now, or the question points, we've got to change clients' perceptions. In order to do that, we have got to be consistent, repeated, ongoing, proactive marketing. Some of the firms said, oh, we didn't get much work. What marketing have you done? Oh, we haven't had time for that. Well, that's not a surprise then. The more you do, the more you're going to get. Writing to every client will get you some work. As we say in Cornwall, directly. Directly is like manana, but without the urgency. Okay, so we will have this marketplace eventually. Maximise being first in town or one of the first in town. Put a strategy together. I know it's a strange thing. Not many accountants like to do this. It always amazes me the number of firms who don't have written business plans and strategy. But think about this. How are we going to do this? What are we going to do? The idea of marketing is to create a steady stream of leads for your salespeople, which normally is the partners or principals. And by the way, once they come in, you want shooting if you don't convert them. You know, it really is, they've come to you, they're sold already. The only thing you can do is annoy them and lose them. I would start with some basics, some brochures, some articles, banner adverts on your website, and then start to get onto other material, start to use social media. If it's not you, find somebody young in your practice who does do it. It doesn't actually have to be a technical person. In fact, it's probably best not written by a technical person because you'll get too hung up over the ins and outs, the ifs and buts. Look at strategic alliances, look at your target client list and start your focus marketing on your target client list, having done a basic scattergun to start with. And then look at other things like advertising. There's an awful lot of stuff that you can do there, and as I said, the more you do, the more work you'll get. Thank you.